This is my talk. It's called Pro Evangelism Through Civic Hacking, and I borrow pretty heavily from these people. So this came about basically through some formative years where local DC PM group was starting to shrink, and it made me think about what might be going wrong, and these people also seem to have thought similar things. So I borrow heavily from them. So, hello. This is me. We don't really care that much. So I'm going to give you some backstory just because it's pertinent to why I care about this in the first place. I'm largely self-taught. I started programming when I was 6 using BASIC and a Color Computer 3 that we got. I was almost published in a magazine called PCM, which is what I learned BASIC from, because I made circles on a screen, and I think they just thought it was neat that a kid had submitted something for publishing. But I kept going, and in high school, as I was maybe halfway through, they were just starting to figure out that, hey, maybe computers belonged in the school, and so we got our first computer lab, and we got the first person willing to try to teach programming, and yeah, I think it was Pascal, and I think I made a ASCII chess game that had one extra piece, and then a procedural planet surface generator or something like that, all of which I've forgotten how to do because I wouldn't recognize Pascal now if I saw it. But I went off to University of Maine actually, and I told them I was interested in making games, and they had no idea what I was talking about. So they showed me to computer science, which started out okay, but financial things got weird. So I spent way too long there and really didn't get out of it what I wanted. But in the middle of that, I started working professionally, and the first place was at Interactive Marketing Group in Bangor, Maine, where I probably made 200 static websites. It was all just design work at the time. But after that, I went on to a place called Numbers USA, which is down in DC. Did not move originally. But shortly after I started, they wanted me, once they figured out that I could program, they wanted me to learn this framework that they had made for them by a third party, which was called TCG NUSA. It was basically the name of their company plus the name of ours. And that was all Perl. That was Perl 5.8. This was around 2002. And I think it still pretty much is Perl 5.8 today. After a while, 2007, they didn't want really telecommuters anymore, so they asked me to move to a satellite office in New York, New York, upstate New York, which I did for a couple of years, but then that didn't really work out, so they said, well, could you move to Virginia instead, which I did, but I kind of resented because Northern Virginia / DC area is kind of a swamp in the literal sense. It's just, the climate is horrible. I can't stand it. So kind of wanting to, take control of my future to a certain extent, I started networking, which is not something I'm good at. But I found a local group called DCPM, and they sort of took me in. And at first, when I first started going, we might have 20 or 30 attendees, which was empowering, I think. We had people from ThinkGeek and other places like that. But after a while, fewer people started showing up, and I'm pretty sure I don't smell that bad. So I think it had more something to do with the community overall. So we had just conversations usually at the first Tuesday of the month meetup, like when was the last time so-and-so had come? And then there was questions like, well, how can we get people to come back? And pizza usually increases the equation briefly. They show up for one meetup, maybe two, but it really wasn't a permanent solution. So still concerned about, what was going on, I started contributing to the local workshop, the DC Baltimore Perl workshop. And I am not 100% sure if I was there for 2013, but I was for 14, 15, and 16. After which, in 17, we did the TPC in, Alexandria at the Patent Office. And then after that, we took a break because that was quite a lot of work. But there were some surprises involved with what it took to actually run a thing like that. And one of the things that we learned both, actually, I forgot to mention, we came back just this past April to start up DCBW again. And at both of those of us who organized had to submit our own talks because we didn't get quite enough. to fill out a whole schedule. So one of the things I'm asking for is that people submit more talks for next year. Now, I'm going to put a pin in this because of something that's about to come up in a few minutes here. Not unrelated, not too long after I started at DCPM, I also started attending this thing called Code for Nova, which was an extension of Code for America, which is important coming up. But I'm going to start plagiarizing a whole bunch of people right now. This is Stephen Little. He gave a similar a talk 2013, 2014. That's the TAOB index in the background. I hope I'm saying that correctly. He said things like Perl is not dead, but it is a dead end. And he had complaints about CGI, which I'm pretty sure at work one of our scripts still uses. He said, can we have threads? This, of course, this, like I said, this is dated. This is a little bit old, but it was there during my formative years for this sort of thing. POE is great, back in 1999. Object-oriented, hit in 94. Java ran with it. It took us a while to get around to it. Subroutine signatures are quite recent in the grand scheme of things, but Fortran, COBOL, and Lisp had them forever. CPAN's great, but it's no longer the only game in town for that sort of thing. But these are all pretty, for me at least, low-level things. I wasn't as concerned about those. It was the community stuff that I really sort of latched on. So he said the Perl was sort of an echo chamber. And that's, you know, I resemble that remark to a certain degree because he had to point out when he saw that slide, why not use a postfix dereference, which I had no idea existed until he said it a few days ago. So he said people, once they leave the island, they don't come back. We're proud of our bike shedding because backwards compatibility. I didn't even know what that meant. I had to go look it up. And he wasn't the only one. We got, I hope I say it correctly when I say Mirvold, but I'm going to say Mirvold. He said that Perl's growth has stagnated or declined. Sciences and bioinformatics are mostly in Python. I get to do the former occasionally, but I use R. It's no longer just a rivalry with Python. We've got Ruby and PHP and Node and others to contend with. Perl mongers are just being too busy being productive to herald Perl. And this is one of the things that I really latched onto. So put a pin in that. He said no one's even teaching this stuff. And that's still pretty much true. I went looking at the time. Khan Academy didn't have it. Udacity, Code Academy didn't have it. Various schools that were just starting to flirt with open sourcing some of their coursework didn't have any mention of Perl. There's one called lynda.com that I think at the time had one, and since then I found that Udemy has 3. One of them is pretty long, so it might be pretty good, but I didn't actually look into it. Did you mean Perl? So if you're looking to get help with Perl, there's plenty of tutorials you can find. There are ISCs, there are these groups like DCPM, but unless you already know that you're looking for Perl in the first place, you're not going to find them because you don't know that's a thing. So a person I'm working with at Code for Nova actually just asked me one day, like, people still use this? And as of today, or maybe when I made this slide, 1.something%. Literally Saturday, as I was tinkering with the slides, there was mention that Python has reached a new high. Technically, though, 8.5% is still not as high as Perl was at its peak, but at the time, Perl had fewer adversaries, I suppose. So what's the point of all this? Perl was good to me at a time when I needed it to be. It has served me well throughout an overly long career now, I'm starting to think. Our Perl code base is no longer alone at work, but it is still the most stable piece of work we've got. And we may have upgraded to 5.10, but it's still really, really venerable. And the local group took me in, and that was good. But our attendance is very low these days. In fact, in the last couple of years, probably since TPC, it's not a given that we're going to meet in any given month. So if we meet at all, I just covered that, poof. So I don't really care about indexes. I just care that Perl is still a choice that people can and know they can make if they have a project in mind, or a business to start, or anything like that. So let's see. And quite honestly, Perl is still quite good at what we need it to do. So what then? It's a segue. This is Catherine Bracey. Okay. She has done quite a few things. She gave a TED Talk, or one of these like TEDx side talks they do at TEDx City 2.0, Why Hackers Make Good Citizens. This is sort of where I get into maybe there's something we can do about this. She said, every day cities are being asked to do more with less. And separately, by stitching together each small act of participation, we think we can re-energize citizenship and restore trust in government. So when she's talking about civic hacking, she means fixing local problems. So I'm pretty sure there's a Vulcan proverb in here, something like the needs of the many. So as I was literally designing the first version of this talk, something more than a lightning talk, she was speaking in front of PyCon 2015, giving this, not this talk, but something on this nature, and the people attending seemed to like that quite a bit. It was really quite accidental. I just sort of glanced at Twitter and realized, wait a minute, this is happening. So she said, hacking has equal power for good as it has for evil, and it isn't necessarily done on a computer. Hacking is really just any amateur innovation on an existing system. She gives various examples throughout her talk. She says Betsy Ross is a hacker, the Underground Railroad is a hack, the Wright brothers are hackers in their way, but her favorite was Benjamin Franklin, who invented Bifocal's lightning rod. He created the first volunteer fire brigade for Philadelphia, and American democracy itself could be considered kind of a hack. And despite that, he never filed a single patent. And out of his autobiography, he wrote, Governor Thomas was so pleased with the construction of this stove that he offered to give me a patent for the sole vending of it for a term of years. But I declined it from a principle which has ever weighed with me on such occasions, that as we enjoy great advantages from the inventions of others, we should be glad of an opportunity to serve others by any invention of ours, and freely and generously. So I have examples. The city of Honolulu had a site trying to help visitors and citizens get their way around town, know what there was to do, things like that. No one, it was so terrible people didn't use it. So they asked 3 volunteers to revamp the whole thing, and they were like, yeah, I don't think so. So what they did was they just made fairly simple, there's very little programming involved, something they called Honolulu Answers, which was just more approachable. And they crowdsourced the effort in a single Saturday afternoon with a whole bunch of volunteers, and they just got questions and they wrote answers and they put it on the website, and that was all there is to it. But this was such a huge success that Oakland immediately asked for the same treatment, and that has worked for them as well. Mexico City, some years ago, wanted to spend, or had gotten into a contract to spend their equivalent of $9.8 million for an app to help them track legislation. But the local geese knew that that was absurd. They could do so much better for so much less. So they issued a challenge that had to be completed in 10 days. There was a reward involved, I think, for winners of $9,800, so about 1/10,000th of the fee. They got 173 submissions, 5 of which were considered winners and went on in and are still being used by the legislators in Mexico City. And that really sort of inspired a whole bunch of people to try the same thing for other problems that needed solving. This is one I'm personally familiar with, the National Science Foundation. Trying to remember when, this is a few years back. There was a time where budget cuts were being sought, and they take in a lot of tax money and they give it away again. And in some cases, it didn't look like that money did much, so they were a prime target for cuts, which they didn't want to be. And it turns out there was a good reason. So we, at Code for Nova, we took a look at this, and by hand, we just looked at 1 year. So by 2012, they gave out money, usually a few million here, a few million there, mostly to universities. And then what sometimes or often happens is somebody from that research invents something and they think, wait, there's a business here, and they patent it. And if that happens, they just want to know, was our money well spent? And there's a form you fill out. But it turns out compliance for that was very low, even when they tried to comply. Like they put the ID number of the grant in the wrong field or in the wrong format. Now, this is just a simple regex problem, which it turned out to be, but they wrote these pattern matching things, and what they found was that the number of patents that came from their grants issued in 2012 were 8 times what they thought they were. So when you're trying to go to the government and say, our money is useful, that really, really helped. So aside from those of us who knew more about what was going on, thank you, mostly that was done by students. So any of that could have been done in Perl. I don't think any of it was. So what I'm saying is there are a lot of things out there that need fixing. There are a lot of people right here who know how to fix things, and Perl is a pretty good tool for doing that. So what if the Perl community went out and found real problems, solved them with Perl, and gave away the results? What if the gift needed just a little bit of support that could be satisfied by some local youth on as a summer job? What if that little hack spread to the towns nearby? And what if there was enough of them using it that they needed support and you needed to start a business to support this thing you made? What if you hired people into this business and trained them in Perl? And maybe a few more people will start showing up. What if this new blood started showing up to this conference or to our local one? What if they showed up to DCPM again and we were actually meeting every month? Or I don't know what it's like here, but I assume it might be similar. What if you made an app that just helped locals report problems with their local roads? Or an app that, or an easy to install toolkit that helped townsfolk organize their own social hacks without having to know programming? What if you made a module bent on teaching programming and used Perl to do it? What if that meant Perl was taught alongside Python or instead of Python to middle schoolers and high schoolers? What if, after all that, you released a free and easy to install application that turned education on its head such that teachers were paid more, but students could also master any and every subject they wanted? What if you fixed online voting or helped people understand how to have their carbon footprint? What if Perl became synonymous with civic hacking or improving the world? Perl 5 and 6 can do this, so we just need people to know that. What I've observed from both groups is that people show up when there's something to do. I mean, a lot of them come because they think they're going to learn this and get a job, but also the thing that keeps them coming back is there's actually something happening. There's a project. So what we need is to give Perl, I think, a project or 10. On that note, I have a project. It's called Ingredient Guru. It's sort of bent on improving public health through healthy eating, having leveraged folks' competitive spirit, I'm being vague here on purpose, while saving them money. And part of the impetus behind this is the AMA some years ago estimated that 3/4 of our medical spending was based on the side effects of poor nutrition. So right now we're doing it in Perl 6 using Crow. I'm leading the project. I'm not doing much though. But again, high school students are working on this. So they're actively learning Perl now where they wouldn't have before. And their teacher, who had been relying on Python up until now, really seems to like this language. He's only been looking at it for a few weeks, though. And one of the reasons he said, I think, do I have a slide for this? We'll present this, hopefully something, at the DCPW, maybe TPC next year. But his reason for choosing Python to teach was that it was already highly opinionated, that he didn't want the students to worry about the flexibility of something like Perl. He wanted them to understand the concepts first. And it struck me that if we made a module that sort of induced some opinionatedness on Perl as a teaching toolkit, they can get started that way, and then you sort of dial it back so they can get more of the flexibility that Perl offers. So that's pretty much it. Any questions? Holy crap. Okay.
It's more of a comment than a question.
Yep.
Another kind of civic hacking project, or effort, it's not a single project, but I think it's really interesting, is the GovZero stuff in Taiwan. I don't know if
GovZero?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm pretty sure there's some information in English. And if any of you know Audrey Tang, who's been involved with Perl a lot in the past, she was one of the people very involved in this. And actually it led to her becoming a member of the Taiwanese cabinet.
Nice.
And so it's just really interesting to read about, a really good example of
Yep.
civic hacking done really well.
Well, it's just at work. I mean, I'm sadly sort of overseeing the extrication of our Perl framework. We're replacing it. And I wouldn't be doing that voluntarily, but I'm a little frustrated with how long it's taking my staff to get new things done, whereas I could just turn to Perl and get it done just like that. And I feel like something that works that well should be made available to the people who want to do little projects like this, or things that won't even necessarily stay little. Was there another question?
What was the name of the last project you were talking about?
Ingredient.guru. You won't be able to find, I don't think, anywhere outside of GitHub yet, because it's very young. I mean, like I said, high school students are starting to poke at this, so they've got a lot to get their heads around at this point, but we hope to present something next year. Anything else? Okay. Do I do anything?